So let's jump in to HR127, a federal gun control proposal. And Dad, to start out, not specifically this proposal, but any proposal that's put out in the House, can you explain real quickly what that is and how that process works?
Any congressman can file a bill. This bill was filed. It goes to the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House then assigns it to various committees to review the bill, amend it, do whatever it is they're going to do before the bill ever comes to the floor of the House. If it passes, then it has to go to the Senate. So it's a long way from becoming law.
Right. And so the rep that proposed this bill is Sheila Jackson Lee. And generally speaking, it's a gun control bill. So we're going to go through each step that it limits basically our Second Amendment right to bear arms and whether or not this is constitutional, legal, right, the way things should be. We'll kind of go through it piece by piece and talk about that. So the first thing that this bill would do is require a license to own a firearm or ammunition. So Pete, explain what that means.
All right. In other words, you would have to have authority from some governmental agency to even possess a firearm, the bullets, the shells, and this section of the bill even goes as far as to discuss having the license to have an antique firearm. So anything that potentially has trigger and projectile that goes off the front
Even if you're
end,
just going to display it.
yeah, has to have its license.
You know, in a lot of bills like this, they're not retroactive, which means they don't. If you already possess a gun, you know, they wouldn't go back and make you do a license.
You'd
but not this
grandfather in.
bill.
So this one doesn't have a grandfather.
You have 3 months. If you own a gun, you have 3 months to get a license for that gun. Otherwise, you're in violation of this law.
I can't imagine the backlog that would create. They wouldn't even be able to get you that in 3
There's no
months, so
way.
that would be changed. So let's just real quick get through this one because I think we're all going to be in agreement on this part. Do we agree with this? Do we think this is right and constitutional?
I do not believe it's constitutional. I do not believe it's right. And the constitutional provision is the broadness of it. All firearms, no matter how you possess them and no matter how long you've possessed them. I think that's far too broad. I think that the Second Amendment wouldn't require this.
Yeah, I agree.
Wouldn't allow it.
Right.
Right?
It
Even
doesn't
wouldn't
make
allow it. Right. So to me, this one is just way too overreaching when you talk about all firearms, requiring a license, requiring the government to be able to know this, because then this all becomes public record, right? Just like a driver's license, things like that. And what can go wrong if you know where every single gun is in the world?
Well, and therein lies the issue. You know, if you're a criminal, what you do is you go online, you're like, all right, this address looks nice, put in the address, and it's like, oh, look, no guns in this house. We're
That's
robbing
where I'm
this
going
guy.
with my gun that I have illegally, but I don't care because I'm a criminal.
It can go the other way. I want some guns. Let me find a house that's got a lot of guns.
Go steal
I'll
the
break
guns.
into that house so I can steal the guns.
Either way, this is information the criminals don't need, right? Okay, so the next thing that it would do is require, so there's a lot of licensing requirements we're going to go through piece by piece, and then later on in the podcast, we're going to go through what the actual licensing requirements are. So the additional license that it would require is you have to have an additional license to display an antique firearm, which Pete already kind of mentioned, but you're not that's not just the regular license. You'd have to get another one if you want to display it, okay? Number 3, an additional license for possession of military-style weapons. What does that mean, Pete? Our token military guy.
Who knows what that means? Anything that looks like it's military style, by definition, it doesn't say anything. It's just words, amorphous concept of words.
And keep in mind, we don't know how much that additional license would cost.
Well, we'll get into the fees
so
later,
I'm
but
just
that
saying,
doesn't
but
matter.
we don't know how much these things are going to cost.
Who cares
everybody.
about that? The question is, what does military-style weapons mean?
Well, they define it in there. I think, wasn't the clip, 20 bullets? Wasn't that in?
Well, that's a different one because there's another one for the high capacity ammunition loading or whatever. But so I think military style weapons, that definition could change. But I wouldn't really have a problem with an additional license if you're going to have a military style weapon, depending on what that definition is. I kind of think it's fine if you need to require a license for some heavier duty firearms. Like, that's always going to be my position. Now, that's different than all firearms. That's different than, home protection. If you have a gun in your house, you have a shotgun or a handgun in your house, I don't think you need to be applying for a license for that. I don't think the government needs to know that. I don't think it needs to be public record. Those are all things that I think are really important, and that's what I think the Second Amendment protects. I don't think it necessarily protects that all these people can have, crazy, semi-automatic guns or assault rifles or whatever. I think people can own those, but I'm okay with the government knowing who owns those and them having to apply for a license.
Well, too, you got to figure out, again, the definition is important. is a fully automatic weapon or a semi-automatic weapon? How about the way weapons can be converted to be fully automatic or semi-automatic to qualify for that? Right now there is actually a license to possess those kinds of weapons. That's not a new concept because the Supreme Court has said reasonable restrictions. They can have reasonable restrictions on firearms.
Which that's the point. The Second Amendment does not it's not so broad to say no restrictions ever on guns. People can possess any guns at any time, wherever they want, and show them wherever they want and use them however they want. That's not what the Second Amendment says. You can have restrictions on the right to bear arms, but they have to be reasonable restrictions. And the number one point of the Second Amendment to me is to protect yourself and your home, like the Castle Doctrine. That to me is the most important protection of the Second Amendment, which there is a restriction on that we'll get to in here in a little bit. But these semi-automatic assault rifle type of guns that Pete has, that, those I think I would be 100% fine with somebody like Pete having that, right? Doesn't bother me. But I would also be fine if he had to have a license to show that he had those guns. It's the same thing as a carry concealed permit. Like, people should have to have a license to carry concealed weapon. I mean, that's just how I feel. I'm the softest on this issue out of this group.
I agree with you on the assault weapons. On those really heavy-duty guns that really have no hunting purpose, they're not really shotguns to go hunting or anything like that. I agree that those kind of restrictions make sense to me.
See, I see it differently. And the way I see it is the Constitution, especially the Second Amendment, was set up to prevent tyranny. You cannot prevent tyranny if your populace doesn't have firearms that are
if you have a handgun,
akin to military-style weapons.
That's true. I mean, I guess that's true. And then the fear would be if it got to a certain number of people that had military-style weapons, would they stop allowing them? And then at that point, the government doesn't want the people to get too powerful and have too much firepower, which, again, is scary to me, and I would want to protect to that. But I understand, again, they should not be able to limit the number of licenses. If every single person that qualified wanted to file for this license, they should get it. Right? So I wouldn't agree with a limit on the licensing for military-style weapons, but generally I'm fine with them. And again, I guess we're going to end up getting to the slippery slope argument, because where do they stop if you start letting them regulate? Are they going to go overboard? All right, let's get to the next one. It would impose mandated firearm liability insurance with a yearly fee of $800 payable to the U.S. Attorney General.
We call that a tax.
So what do you think about that?
I think this is where they threw the tea into the harbor and put tar and feathers on government officials.
Well, and there's an old saying, the ability to tax is the ability to control and destroy. So if you can tax somebody, that means you can control them and you can destroy them. And the Attorney General is not set up to be an insurance agent.
Yeah, that's really weird to me.
I don't understand that at all.
Because generally what I would like, I kind of like this idea, if you have a gun, especially at your house, or if you have a gun and you're carry concealed it and somebody gets shot, or you shoot the wrong person because you're not law enforcement or you don't know what the heck you're doing with your gun, you should have insurance to cover that. I mean, accidental shootings or even purposeful shootings, you should have insurance to cover that. Your homeowner's insurance should go up, whatever it may be. If you have a gun in your house, I have a gun in my house, I'd be perfectly fine paying more homeowner's insurance for that. I know a lot of people won't and hate that, and they hate insurance companies, but if you can insure yourself for something like this, which is a hazard, I mean, it's just like, fireworks or whatever that should be intentional, or gross recklessness and gross negligence. If you have these things, these activities that are obviously hazardous and dangerous, like a firearm, I'm cool with them making you have insurance. It makes no sense to me that you send $800 to the U.S. Attorney General. Like, how much insurance do you have? How are they going to make the claims? How are they going to see? It's just a tax at that point, which is stupid.
There's a problem with that.
Okay.
And that is that what this is an indirect registration. Let's say you don't have to license, but you have to have insurance. Well, doesn't that mean the government can demand to see your insurance policy, and therefore will know that you have a gun? It's just like licensing.
There's different, though, because I can have 10 guns in my house and just check on my insurance, my homeowner's insurance, that I have a gun in the house. Just check a box. Or I could not even have a gun in the house, but still pay for it in case I want to get a gun.
And if you don't, then they'd have to have a penalty if you didn't have insurance, right?
I don't know. Or you just can sue that person personally. They're automatically liable, like the dog bite, strict liability. That's what I was thinking about. So that's what happens when you do fireworks and stuff like that. It's strict liability. If you're playing with fireworks and somebody gets hurt, you're at fault.
Right.
If you shoot somebody, strict liability, you're at fault. I would like to see insurance on homeowners insurance policies like that mandated. I'd be fine with that if that was mandated. It wouldn't bother me one bit.
Yeah, just to me, it looks like another way for the government to come in and say, all right, show me your insurance.
Well, and that's fine. So Okay, we already talked about the registration system being public, which we talked about kind of the pros and cons of that. I don't see any need for that to be public. That's kind of a weird thing. That's just government control.
Yeah, and I think
that's obvious.
I think that's designed. We have a Democratic senator from Texas who was a lawyer and a judge that filed this bill. I think that's just another way of discouraging firearm ownership. Is if you have to become public, I think some people wouldn't like everybody to know that they had firearms. So I think, again, it's a way of discouraging firearm ownership.
The fact that it's public is exactly that. You put it public, why? Either to shame people or to make them target. Yeah, to discourage.
Right. Yeah, but it happens in nonprofits. A conservative nonprofit, they want them to publish their donors. So when donors get published, those donors are harassed by people who disagree with their positions. And the same thing would happen with gun ownership.
So, and I actually think there's an interesting element to if we make the licensing private, like a carry concealed thing where like not everybody knows who has a carry concealed permit for some of these licensing requirements that we're going to get to now, because I actually agree with a lot of these licensing requirements, and I'd be fine if people couldn't have guns until they did all these things, but I don't think it should necessarily be public record or even be on a government registry if there was some other way we could do it. So let's get into the licensing requirements. The first one is that you would have to be 21 years of age. Doesn't bother me one bit, but you guys have some other thoughts on that.
Well, it says 21 years of age to possess any firearm. So let me ask, my 14-year-old daughter who goes skeet shooting with me, does that mean she can't possess the firearm because she's 14?
Yes, because it means you can't loan her that firearm to go shooting.
How about my buddies that take their 8 or 10-year-old children hunting?
Yeah.
Can't possess it. So how do you teach gun safety from a young age if you cannot put a gun in somebody's hand until you're 21?
And there's another aspect to it, and this is an argument that went back a long time ago for other things. You can be in the military at 18 and assault weapons or something that you use in the military.
Well, you can't drink alcohol
18.
still. You can be in the military and give your life for our country, but you can't drink alcohol.
There are actually some states that allow you to drink under 21 if you have a military
Okay,
ID.
but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, 18-year-olds can go to the military, but there are still other things they can't do. So if you're not, and that's fine. I'd be fine with if you have a military card, you can possess a weapon, obviously, since the government's going to give you weapons.
That would be fine with me for an exception like that.
So you would think 18 is better than 21?
The way it is now,
you wouldn't do it, period.
I wouldn't do it, period.
Right.
The way it is now, I would make a restriction like it is now on purchase. A 12-year-old can't go into a gun store and buy an AR-15.
And this should say maybe can't possess a gun without a legal guardian with them or something like that. Right. Okay. Number 2, undergo a criminal background check.
Every day, all day, do it.
I'm all good with that.
No problem, except, again, the broadness of the original licensing. I have no problem if you go to a store, which they do now.
Right.
A commercial establishment in the business of selling guns has to do a background check. I've got no problem with that. But again, who's going to pay for the background check?
I'll pay for it.
Right. No, people, yeah, I think people should have to pay for their own background check if they want to buy a gun. Number 3, completion of a minimum 24-hour training course certified by the U.S. Attorney General. I'm 100% cool with this. You guys can act like you don't like this, but that's stupid. If you're gonna buy a gun, I would like to take a 24-hour course. I went shooting with people that know how to shoot when I first bought my gun, so they could teach me how to do this stuff. Who wants to buy a gun without learning how to use it?
I don't know if do you have a concealed weapons permit?
No, I never want one.
I do.
Yeah, and you guys took the course.
And we took the course, and the course was about 2 hours or something like that.
It was a joke.
And we shot one bullet into a pile of sand to show that we could shoot a gun. And that was all it required for the concealed weapons permit.
I have a permit too, but I'm exempt from that requirement because we actually did a live fire exercise when I was in the Army. And I will tell you, you can learn a lot in 24 hours.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's a great requirement.
Yeah.
I think it's a small sacrifice for you to spend 24 hours before you have to buy a gun. I'm cool with that. Again, my biggest issue with this is not these licensing requirements. I actually really like them, and I think that people should have to do it, and you should have to keep your proof whenever you need to produce it, but I don't think it should be something that the government needs to know about or that you need to involve the government with it, unless somebody calls you out on it or you use your firearm or they see their firearm and they say, you need to produce all your paperwork, and you can't, then I think that's where the issue comes in.
The 24-hour training doesn't offend me.
Okay, this one's a little longer, and I want to read it. It's generally you have to go through a psychological evaluation. But I want to read it because there's a lot of kind of things in this paragraph. You would be required to, if you get a license to possess a firearm, to undergo a psychological evaluation, and the evaluation does not indicate that the individual is psychologically unsuited to possess a firearm. As deemed necessary by the licensed psychologist involved, the evaluation included a psychological evaluation of the members of the household in which the individual resides, and as part of the psychological evaluation, the licensed psychologist interviewed any spouse of the individual, any former spouse of the individual, and at least 2 other persons who are a member of the family, or an associate of the individual, to further determine the state of the mental, emotional, and relational stability of the individual in relation to firearms.
That is the stupidest conglomerate of words I've heard yet, and I'll tell you why. I can find anyone to say bad things about any of us.
I mean, I get it. I mean, I don't think it would apply to any of us in the room if you just go by that, spouses, people in the household, or people that associates that we mentioned. But I like the idea of a psychological evaluation. But to me, it should be an interview with one person, with one psychologist, and if it is not crazy red flags, they should be able to possess a gun, right? I mean, mental health is such a scary thing. If you get labeled as someone that has mental health issues, it's so ostracizing and just condemning and horrible in the world today. We're trying to become more aware of it and better of it as we go. I have a feeling this could make it worse. It's like, oh, you admit that you've struggled with mental health and you treat with a psychologist and go to therapy. That's a good thing. We're praising that these days. This, I think, could potentially condemn that, number one. Number two, why do you need to talk to their former spouses and their kids and their associates? First off, that makes it so burdensome to go through this cycle evaluation. That makes no sense to me. And number two, that's just asking for problems. So if my ex-wife says that I'm aggressive and dangerous or whatever, and I've threatened her, so now I can't get a gun?
You got it.
That's just so stupid to me. I like the idea of a psychological evaluation, but I think, and you can call me whatever you want, the bar should be pretty low, but I think you should have to pass a psychological eval to get a gun.
The military has a psychological evaluation as part of their standard whatever. And you know what? There are some pretty unstable guys carrying guns around in the military. Yeah. I don't know how you quantify this, because what about people that have depression? Does that mean you now have a psychological condition, you can't own a gun?
And that's the problem, is I think it needs to be defined, and I think your psychological condition needs to correlate with the reason you can't own a gun.
I view this also as an assault on our privacy.
That's
honestly.
fine.
I do. I keep in mind, for everybody who's listening, is we are talking about these requirements, but these requirements would apply to everybody owning a gun anywhere, including privately, which we generally disagree with.
Right, we generally disagree with the licensing of every firearm. Right. So we're out on this. But we're trying to talk through and understand where they're coming from with some of these requirements. And I agree with some of them, but yeah, I agree generally with a psychological evaluation, meaning like you're applying for, you're trying to buy a gun, and they send you a link, and you just do a Zoom meeting with a psychologist for 30 minutes for them to make sure you're okay. You're not going to be able to dig into every single person's life. And again, this is just a major discouragement to buy a gun or trying to limit the people that buy the guns.
Who pays for this?
Right. And
who pays for the psych exam?
That's a great segue into the next section, which are fees. So let me just read the fees real quick, and then we'll talk about them generally. Fee for firearm liability insurance, $800 per year. A fee for the firearm and ammunition license, not yet specified. Fee for the antique firearm license, not yet specified. Fee for the military-style weapon license, not yet specified. Fee for the background check, not yet specified. You see the theme here. Fee for the training course for firearms and ammunition license, not yet specialized. Fee for the licensed psychologist is allowed to charge for the psychological evaluation, not yet specialized. And this psychologist... Yeah, not yet specified. And the psychologist must be approved by the Attorney General. Let me see if there are any more fees that I missed. No. So, that sounds like a ton of fees, and we know how expensive psychologists can be, and licensing and things like that.
It's going to be a boondoggle. I mean, think about it, the psychologist. Oh, I'm going to go get certified by the Attorney General. They're going to make a fortune. How many millions of guns are there already in the United States? So I mean, this is going to make somebody very rich.
Yeah. So fee for firearm liability insurance, $800 a year. What does that cover? Because what kind of insurance are you going to get for a dangerous instrumentality where the ultimate result of needing the insurance is maiming or death? Yeah, you going to get for $800?
To me, that's majorly problematic. These fees are crazy to think that everybody's going to have to pay for all this. To me, this seems very anti-democratic, because only the wealthy are now going to own guns, and we're just going to create even more of a separation that not only do they have the money and power, but now the wealthy people also have all the firearms and ammunition. Does that make any sense?
And are we going to make more criminals, again, of the people that can't afford? In other words, do poor people become criminals because they cannot afford to pay all these fees?
This just seems so stupid to me.
I can see where in somebody's mind this would come up. I can understand if you were just to look at the news and say, gosh, people that are crazy commit gun crimes. Gosh, if we knew this person had a gun, this crime wouldn't have happened. But that's, you're trying to pick and choose specific instances and then try to regulate an entire industry based on specific industries. It doesn't work that way because criminals don't care.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's always been the problem with licensing and gun control and all this stuff is that the criminals are not going to abide by these laws, and that's just the major issue that we keep coming back to. But I like some of these ideas. I mean, I know you can call me whatever you want, but I kind of like some of these ideas of limiting who can have guns, especially the military-style weapons. And let's get to the last part. The bill criminalizes the following things. It shall be unlawful for a person to sell or give a firearm or ammunition to another person unless the person has notified the Attorney General of the sale or gift. So you can't, and then I'll just say the next one says loan the same thing. So you can't gift or loan a gun to anybody ever without first telling the government, applying to do this, whatever it may
how
be.
ridiculous is that?
That's so stupid.
First of all, they wouldn't be able to keep up with it. So if I called up and said, hey, my daughter and I are going skeet shooting today, I'm going to loan her my shotgun and she's going to have 50 rounds of ammunition. Click.
No, but she couldn't because she'd have to go through all of the psychological training. You can't do it like that.
Impossible.
You have to go through the entire licensing requirement, the 24-hour training course. You have to have the psychological eval. You have to pay the $800. She would have to do all that stuff just for you to loan her the gun.
She'd have to be 21 first.
Exactly.
And just to show the absurdity of this, and we all know the reason for this bill is to get rid of guns. And if you violate this law, if you loan, let's say, a gun to your son to go skeet shooting, the son there's a minimum mandatory 15 years in prison for the person you loaned the gun to, a minimum mandatory 25 years in prison for loaning the gun, and a minimum fine of $75,000.
So what do you think this is going to do? So anybody, again, we're talking about not the wealthy. If they do something like this, either get the gun or loan the gun or sell the gun or gift the gun, now they're in jail forever because they're never getting out. They're never paying the $75,000 or $150,000 fines that are included in this criminal behavior. This is insanity to me that we're going to go from we have the right to bear arms, all citizens of the United States have the right to bear arms, to now you're going to jail for 15 years if you give your friend or your daughter or your son or your dad a gun.
Can you imagine the federal prison system? Right now, drugs are the number one crime in the federal prison system. When you start doing 15-year mandatory minimums for loaning a gun, the prison
there
system
doesn't even have to be
gonna
any injury or any criminal
nothing.
behavior, nothing.
Which is really funny because these are the same people in the other breath that will tell you that minimum mandatory prison sentences are wrong because it pigeonholes people in certain socioeconomic
This seems
demographics.
like one of those circular things too that's going to come back like during the debates when Biden was really hard on drugs and so was Kamala Harris really hard on drugs, and now they're all this drug reform and trying to go easier. It's like we need to be a little more, forethought in that people shouldn't be going to jail for drug offenses for the rest of their life.
Right, 'cause
that
you're an
shouldn't
addict.
happen. We should have never done stuff like that, and now we're backtracking on it. For giving your gun to your son or something like that, going to jail for 15 years. This is a bad look right now. Imagine what we're going to think about when all these people are going to jail or we have all these fines and things. It's like, wait a second, maybe this was a bad idea.
It is a regular event in totalitarian type countries.
Right, exactly.
For them to
That's
first
scary.
off license guns, and then they start collecting the guns so that no one in the street, no average person has guns except for the government.
What do you think happens to the gun that you gifted to your son? You think you get that gun back?
Oh, of course
No, while
not.
you're in jail, they're taking that gun and all your other guns, and
Right.
you're never getting those back. Let me just run through some of the other things that would be criminalized. It's unlawful to transfer a firearm. So now they're just covering everything: loan, gift, transfer.
now you can't sell it.
Whatever it is.
Give it.
No, sale was in here too. I mean, anyway, you can't give a gun to an unlicensed person. So then that puts the burden on you. You now have to search for the license to see if they have it. It shall be unlawful for a person holding a valid license to transfer a firearm to an individual who is not 18 years of age. I don't understand how that makes any sense because you can't get a license unless you're 21, but now they're limiting it to 18. It shall be unlawful for any person to possess ammunition that is .5 caliber or greater.
That's a 50 caliber.
So
But
50
can I
caliber.
throw something in there?
Sure.
If you're an individual and you have a firearm that carries an ammunition of greater than 50 caliber, I'm afraid. Because you probably shouldn't have that.
Okay,
That's
so
like,
cool. We're cool with that. It shall be unlawful for any person to possess a large capacity ammunition feeding device. This is what we were talking about before.
Right.
also cool with this one. Like, I don't think you should have this stuff.
We've had this
I think the definition of large, though.
Here it is. The
a
term
problem.
large capacity ammunition feeding device means a magazine, belt, drum, feed strip, or similar device that has a capacity of, or that can be readily stored or converted to accept more than 10 rounds of ammunition, but that does not include an attached tubular device designed to accept and capable of operating only with a .22 caliber firearm ammunition.
Because 22 calibers, normally you pour the rounds into the tube underneath, and you normally can put 20 of those in there.
And 10 is actually a little small, to be honest with you, because there are a lot of semi-automatic pistols that just in their regular magazine, nothing, no banana clips or anything, that hold more than 10 shots.
Right.
So, we don't like the criminalization of it, obviously. I think it's kind of crazy. To end, I just want to give my idea of what I think would actually work, and you guys can tell me why I'm wrong and kind of rip it apart. So I think this system, there's a lot of good things in this bill, which you guys have disagreed with for the most part. I think there's a lot of good things in this bill that are just slightly off, which is obviously going to be a major point of contention that no Democrats would agree with me, no Republicans would agree with me probably. But I think this system would work in the reverse. I think, the government should maybe, I don't know how they could make you take a course or put some requirements on it, but what there should be is a public registry of all of the entire list of everyone who can't own a firearm, right? So they should have to do the psychological testing, and if they're nixed or red flag, they should then go on the list so you can look it up to see, I can't give this person a gun, whatever it may be. Because if you could look up who you couldn't give guns to or sell guns to, then you have the opportunity to print that list or show that you looked them up and it's okay, and just keep it to yourself. You don't have to produce it unless that person goes and kills someone and says, Peter gave me the gun, and I can say, well, they weren't on the list, so I did nothing wrong. So basically something in reverse where people that are unlicensed are searchable, so you can make sure you're not giving guns to them, and then also put in something into place. Maybe give a benefit. Maybe give some kind of benefit for the psychological testing, the 24-hour training, and all that stuff. If we really want people to be safe with guns, I think that's what the government would do. I think this type of proposal does the opposite, exactly what you guys said. It's trying to deter people from owning guns.
How about this one? Leave the law-abiding people out of it completely. They had it right.
So you can just have guns until you commit a crime.
Yeah, and if you commit a crime, then it's on. And go ahead, George.
Well, that's why you have minimum mandatories. Now, if you commit a crime with a gun, you have a minimum mandatory. You have to go to prison. We have that punishment. I don't like the bill at all.
But I'm saying, but if they do the psychological testing or they don't do the 24-hour course, they can be on a list. Or if they fail the 24-hour course, they can be on a list, so I can't give them a gun.
So they can be on a list that's publicly available, right?
That's pretty bad.
So what happens to the privilege of you talking to a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Yeah, that's true.
So that it's not public record, so that someone can't use it, like your ex-wife can't use it against you in your divorce proceedings by saying, aha, look, he's on the list.
Yeah, it's true.
He's labeled as a psycho.
You know what the thing is? But what you just did is exactly the point of this whole thing. It makes sense as a general concept. We all believe that we should limit criminals and bad things happening.
And people that are not qualified to have guns.
Yeah,
we should try to limit that, but it's really hard, I guess, to not then get other people caught in the net.
Do you know that right now in this country there are 22,000 laws limiting guns? Throughout all the states, everywhere. Like say Florida is an example. There are some problems with the local laws. One of the problems people complain about is these, what are they called, the shows?
The gun show. So there's a loophole.
Yeah.
The gun shows, there's a loophole. You can close those loopholes without making everyone a possible criminal and making this prohibitively expensive for those people in lower income brackets.
And you could easily, especially people that don't know what's going on, easily unknowingly commit these crimes. And it doesn't say that. It doesn't say knowingly give it to an unlicensed person. It just says giving it to an unlicensed person.
Right.
Okay, so overall, we hate the bill, I guess. I really like some parts of it, and I feel like there's a way to do this, but if the government hasn't been able to do it in all these years, will we ever be able to fix it is the question.
I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's our take on HR127. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let us know what you think about it in the comments. Leave us a like. Subscribe to the channel. We'll be back next time.